Welcome to the final video in my Ultimate Skills Breakdown series where we will go over all of the archer skills in the DioField Chronicle. If you haven't seen the other videos covering the other three classes, you can find them on this playlist. The archer skills give us a lot of ranged, multi-target debuffing options to use in combat. So without further ado, let's get started. First up, we have Fantail Formation. This skill can do a decent amount of damage over time, provided enemies do not move out of its area of effect. At level 2, it also gives weakness to enemies it hits, lessening their attack power. At level 3, it does more damage, and at level 4, it gets better range. This formation skill works really well in narrow spaces where it can hit multiple enemies, or on bosses locked down by your melee units. In addition, weakening bosses in particular can be very useful for protecting your unit's health. Moving up the bow side of the skill tree, we come to Rain of Arrows. This is one of the bow skills that I use the most. It does decent damage in a small area of effect, and inflicts delay, which is great for slowing down pesky cavaliers. It also does extra damage to cavaliers at level 1, has a reduced EP cost at level 2, and gains a larger area of effect at level 3. In addition, the EP and cooldown cost isn't too bad for the amount of damage it does. Next we have Backflip. If you find your archer getting too close to the action, this is a good skill to get them to safety. Backflip deals light damage, but cancels its target's next action, immobilizes them, and moves your archer away. At level 1, this skill also gives your archer increased damage during the cooldown period. At level 2, it gets an EP cost reduction, and at level 3, it gains increased range. Backflip is pretty expensive though at 30 EP and a 12-second cooldown, so if you can generally keep your archer out of trouble, there are better skills to use since this one has such a short range compared to most. Trapcaster is a great way to set ambushes for enemies. It fires out a tripwire that when crossed explodes, damaging enemies in the area. It also does decent damage and has a low EP cost at only 20. The only downside is the longer cooldown at 10 seconds. At level 1, it does more damage, at level 2 it gets reduced cooldown time, and at level 3 it gets increased range. Trapcaster is also a viable option in a group of bunched up enemies, as if you fire it right on top of them, it will still go off and damage the group of enemies. Next is Stun Shot. This is the other bow skill that I got the most use out of due to the stun effect. Stun Shot does little damage at relatively high cost in EP and cooldown, but since it inflicts stun at a good range, it actually becomes highly effective at interrupting enemies. This skill was my go-to to interrupt enemy skills, and if I didn't have it equipped, it became far more challenging to prevent an enemy skill from going off. At level 1, it gets a better cooldown, at level 2, it gives Wither, making the enemy take more damage, and at level 3, it gains more range. Stun Shot. Don't leave Elm Camp without it. Last on the bow side of the tree, we have Concentrated Volley, the bow's ultimate skill. This one is a great single target damage dealer, particularly when used on magicers, as it does extra damage to them. At level 1, it does more damage, at level 2, it gets more range, and at level 3, it gets even better by inflicting stun. I really like this skill for quickly taking out magicers or doing great damage to a single target, but therein lies the problem too. For a skill with a 35 EP cost and a 20-second cooldown that only targets one enemy, it isn't as useful as it could be, but still very powerful. But your likes are very powerful, so remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more tactical RPG content. Thank you, and I appreciate all your support. Moving over now to the firearms side of the tree, we have Railgun. Railgun fires in a straight line, damaging all enemies along the way and doing more damage the more enemies hit. At level 1, it does extra damage to magicers, at level 2 it does more base damage, and at level 3 it gains more range. If you can manage to line up enemies in a straight line, this can be fairly powerful. The difficulty is in positioning your unit in the right place to take advantage of this. Try using something like Mounted Charge to line enemies up after your archer is already in position. Next is Chain Shot. This skill is very useful when used on groups of enemies, as not only does it damage them all, but it also gives weakness, lowering their damage output. At level 1, its EP cost is reduced by 7, bringing it down to 28. At level 2, it gets more range, and at level 3, it gives Wither, which makes this a great debuffing attack as it will now give 2 status effects to multiple enemies at once. This was one of my go-to skills, and maybe the best one on this side of the tree. Chaos Cluster is a great single target skill. It does decent damage in addition to randomly inflicting either burn, delay, poison, or stun on the target. In addition, each of these other statuses have a 30% chance to be inflicted as well. Once upgraded to level 3, this becomes a 50% chance. Level 1 reduces its EP cost, and level 2 gives it better range. This is a great skill to pair with something like Pandemic that does increased damage for every status effect on an enemy. Shell Shot is a skill that I found less useful than others. It does damage in a large cone AoE and does more damage the closer an enemy is to your unit using the skill. But even to close enemies, I found the damage on this one pretty weak compared to other archer skills. But if you have a large group of enemies you can hit with it, it can be worth it. But otherwise, I'd stick with Chain Shot. At level 1, Shell Shot gets a reduced cooldown. At level 2, it deals extra damage to Cavaliers, which can be useful. And at level 3, it does more damage. Finally, we have Headshot. If you have a character with high technique, which increases skill crit chance, this skill can be possibly the strongest in the game. Headshot targets one enemy and then does damage to it and all enemies in a cone area of effect behind it. Critical hits, though, do double damage instead of the normal 50% more damage. At level 3, the skill's critical rate is doubled, making critical hits extremely likely. At level 1, it gets more base damage, and at level 2, it gets more range. And with that, we come to the end of the Archer class skills and the skills breakdown series. I hope you enjoyed this video and the series and were able to get some insights into how all the skills work. Thank you all once again so much for watching, and keep on gaming.